In his barn, a grieving rancher found a woman and a letter he never sent, then let her stay. The land had been in his family for generations, stretching across hundreds of acres of rolling fields, dotted with fences and dotted with old oak trees. The ranch had always been a place of life and laughter, a home full of memories, but now it felt empty. The once lively house was quiet, and even the animals seemed to sense the loneliness that had settled over the place. Tom's heart ached for Mary, his late wife, who had passed away 2 years ago. Mary had been the center of his life, a kind, gentle woman who had shared every joy and sorrow with him. Her sudden death left a void that Tom could not fill. He went about his days performing routine tasks on the ranch, but the silence was heavy, pressing down on him, reminding him of what he had lost. The mornings were the hardest. He would wake to the sound of birds calling across the fields, the cool morning air carrying a faint smell of earth and hay. He would dress in his worn boots and denim, feed the cattle, and check the fences. Each chore was familiar and comforting in its own way, yet it felt mechanical, empty. There was no one to share a laugh with, no one to discuss the plans for the day, no one to share a cup of coffee as the sun rose over the horizon. Tom missed Mary's laughter, her gentle teasing, the warmth of her presence. He often found himself standing in the middle of the empty kitchen, staring at the coffee cups they had used together, feeling the weight of absence pressing down on him. He kept a letter tucked away in the top drawer of his old wooden desk. It was a letter he had written to Mary shortly before she passed. In it, he had poured out feelings he had never found the courage to speak aloud. He had told her how much he loved her, how grateful he was for every day they had spent together, and how deeply her absence had shaken him. Yet, for reasons he could not fully explain, he had never sent the letter. It had stayed hidden, a symbol of regret, a reminder of words left unspoken. Sometimes, late at night, he would pull the letter out and read it quietly to himself, imagining Mary sitting across from him and smiling, imagining her understanding the words that never reached her. The barn was his refuge, a place that had always held a sense of security and familiarity. It was a large wooden structure at the edge of the property, filled with hay, tools, and the smell of livestock. Tom spent countless hours there repairing equipment, feeding animals, and simply thinking. The barn had always been a place where he could be alone without feeling lonely, a place where he could focus on work and avoid the emptiness that seemed to follow him everywhere else. But even the barn had changed. It felt quieter now, more hollow, as if it mourned with him. One evening, after a long day of working the land, Tom walked toward the barn, the setting sun casting long shadows across the fields. The sky was painted with soft shades of orange and pink, a peaceful scene that contrasted sharply with the turmoil he felt inside. As he approached, he noticed a faint flickering of light through the cracks in the wooden walls. At first, he thought it was a reflection from the setting sun, but the movement was too deliberate. His heart began to race slightly. He had always been cautious, but this was unusual. He tightened his grip on the handle of his flashlight and stepped closer. The closer he got, the more he realized the light was not coming from the sun but from inside the barn. He paused at the entrance, taking a deep breath. "Who's there?" he called, his voice steady but cautious. There was no immediate reply, only the soft sound of shifting hay. He moved inside slowly, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dim space. Then he saw her. A young woman was huddled in the corner of the barn, her clothes soaked and clinging to her. She looked small and fragile, shivering from cold and fear. Tom froze for a moment, unsure how to react. He had encountered strangers on the property before, but never in this way. He could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the mixture of fear and uncertainty. She looked up at him, startled, but there was no aggression, no threat. Just a person in need. Tom's initial instinct was to turn and walk away. He had lived alone for so long that the idea of taking someone in, even temporarily, felt overwhelming. He had learned to protect himself and his land, and letting a stranger into his life seemed risky. Yet there was something about her, something familiar in her expression, a quiet sadness that mirrored his own. He felt a tug at his heart, a reminder that he too had once needed help and understanding. "Are you okay?" he asked cautiously. The woman nodded, though her teeth chattered slightly. "My car, it broke down," she explained, her voice soft and hesitant. "I didn't know where else to go, and it started raining," she trailed off, clearly exhausted from her journey. Tom could see the mud on her boots, the water dripping from her hair, and the desperation in her eyes. Without thinking too much, Tom offered her a dry blanket and a cup of coffee. He gestured to the far side of the barn where some old bales of hay could serve as a makeshift bed for the night. "You can stay here until the storm passes," he said simply. The woman, whose name he would later learn was Claire, gave a faint smile and nodded gratefully. There was a quiet understanding in that moment, a recognition that sometimes life brings unexpected encounters that can change everything. That night, Tom went back to his house, leaving Claire in the barn. He listened to the rain pattering against the roof, feeling a strange mixture of anxiety and curiosity. He wondered who she was, why she was traveling alone, and what circumstances had led her to this lonely barn. But he also felt a flicker of warmth, something he had not felt in a long time, a sense of connection, however fragile, with another human being. Sleep did not come easily. Tom found himself thinking about Mary, about the letter he had never sent, and about this unexpected guest who had appeared in his life at a moment when he had almost given up on new beginnings. He realized that even in grief, life had a way of surprising him, offering moments of hope and companionship when he least expected them. By the time the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, Tom had made a quiet decision. He would let Claire stay for a while, at least until she could figure out her next steps. The barn, once a place of solitude, could now serve a new purpose, a place of shelter, safety, and perhaps the beginning of healing. As he walked toward the barn that morning, the smell of hay and rain-filled air around him, Tom felt a small, unfamiliar sense of anticipation. This was not a life he had planned, nor a situation he had imagined, but it was real and it was happening. And for the first time in a long while, he felt a spark of hope that the emptiness of the ranch might slowly begin to fade. He opened the barn door to find Claire sitting up on the hay, wrapped in a blanket, staring thoughtfully at the animals feeding nearby. She looked tired but relieved, and when she saw him, she gave a faint, shy smile. "Good morning," she said softly. "Thank you for letting me stay." Tom nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He simply replied, "Morning, don't mention it. The storm's passed, so you can stay as long as you need." And in that moment, the barn, the ranch, and their lives seemed just a little less lonely, just a little more filled with the possibility of friendship, trust, and perhaps something deeper. For Tom, that night had been a turning point. The barn, which had always been a refuge from the world, had unexpectedly brought a new presence into his life. The letter he had never sent to Mary sat in the drawer, still unread aloud, but the act of sharing his space, of offering shelter to someone in need, began to soften the grief that had weighed so heavily on him. He realized that life, even in its quiet, painful moments, could still offer surprises, connections, and a chance to begin again. And so, as the sun rose higher in the sky, illuminating the fields and the barn, Tom and Claire faced the start of a new day. It was a day filled with uncertainty, but also with hope. The ranch, once a place of solitude and sorrow, had begun to take on a new meaning. And for the first time in a long while, Tom felt that perhaps he was not entirely alone in the world after all. The morning after the storm, the ranch looked different. The air was crisp and fresh, carrying the smell of wet earth and hay. Sunlight streamed through the wide-open fields, bouncing off the wooden fences and the barn walls. Tom Harrison moved quietly around the property, feeding the animals and checking fences, his mind partly on the routine chores and partly on the young woman who had spent the night in his barn. Claire had been quiet in the morning, wrapped in the blanket he had given her, sipping a warm cup of coffee. She seemed careful not to intrude, yet her presence filled the space in a way he hadn't realized he had missed for so long. At first, Tom was unsure how to act around her. He had spent 2 years living alone, his life measured by the sun rising and setting over his fields, the cows grazing, and the endless silence of a home that had once been full of laughter. He had gotten used to the routine of solitude, the comforting rhythm of tasks repeated day after day. Now, Claire's presence disrupted that rhythm in the most subtle but noticeable way. He found himself thinking about her, wondering who she was, where she had come from, and why she had chosen his barn as a shelter. "Do you need anything?" Tom asked finally, breaking the silence as he leaned against the barn door. Claire looked up from where she was arranging some hay near the corner and gave a small, tired smile. "No, I think I'm okay," she replied softly. "Thank you for last night. It really helped." Tom nodded, unsure how to respond. There was a pause, a quiet moment in which the sound of the animals moving, and the wind rustling through the trees filled the space. He realized that he had spent so long avoiding connections, protecting himself from pain and disappointment, that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to simply be near another person without fear or suspicion. Claire, with her quiet presence and gentle demeanor, seemed to bring a sense of calm and normalcy that he hadn't felt in years. Over the next few days, Claire began to help around the ranch. She fed the chickens, carried hay bales, and helped clean the barn. She moved carefully at first, aware that she was in a stranger's home, but Tom found himself relaxing around her, surprised at how natural it felt to share the space. He even caught himself talking about Mary, telling stories he hadn't shared in years, stories of long afternoons spent working the land together, of evenings sitting on the porch watching the sun set, of laughter and quiet conversations over cups of coffee. Claire listened patiently, sometimes asking questions, sometimes simply nodding. There was no judgment in her eyes, no rush to change the subject. She seemed genuinely interested in hearing about Tom's life, and he found himself opening up in a way he hadn't expected. It felt strange at first, talking about someone he had loved so deeply, someone who was no longer there, but as he spoke, the memories brought both tears and smiles. He realized that sharing these stories made Mary feel alive again, if only for a moment, and that Claire's presence made it easier to bear the pain of her absence. One afternoon, while organizing some old boxes in the barn, Claire noticed a folded envelope lying in the top drawer of Tom's workbench. She picked it up carefully, sensing its importance. "What's this?" she asked gently. Tom hesitated, then walked over and took the envelope from her hand. It was the letter he had written to Mary but never sent. "I never sent it," he admitted, his voice low. "I don't know why. I guess I thought it would be easier to keep it hidden, to pretend that I had said everything I needed to say while she was still here." He looked down at the envelope, tracing the edges with his fingers. "But I couldn't, not really. It was too hard." Claire sat down on a bale of hay, listening quietly. "Do you want to read it?" she asked softly. There was no pressure in her voice, only understanding. Tom nodded, unfolding the paper carefully. He began to read aloud, his voice trembling slightly. The words were simple but filled with emotion, a mixture of love, regret, and longing. He spoke of the little moments that had meant the most, of the warmth Mary had brought into his life, and of the emptiness he felt now that she was gone. As he read, Claire watched him, noticing the way his hands shook slightly, the way his eyes glistened with unshed tears. She didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes or advice. She simply listened, letting him pour out the emotions he had kept bottled up for too long. When he finished, he folded the letter again, his hands lingering on the paper as if he could feel Mary's presence through it. "Thank you for letting me hear that," Claire said softly. "I can see how much she meant to you, and it's clear you still love her." "That's not something easy to carry," Tom nodded, swallowing hard. "It's not," he admitted. "Some days it feels like a weight I'll never put down. Other days, I wonder if I even deserve to be happy again." Claire reached out, placing a hand lightly on his arm. "Maybe happiness doesn't come all at once," she said gently. "Maybe it's little things like sharing a story, helping on the ranch, or even just being here. Sometimes that's enough to start feeling alive again." Her words struck a chord with Tom. He realized she was right. Life didn't have to be perfect, and happiness didn't have to be immediate or complete. It could be small, simple, and quiet. The act of letting her stay in the barn, of trusting someone new, was a start. It was a small step toward opening his heart again, toward finding meaning in life beyond grief. As the days passed, a routine began to form. Claire would help with chores during the day, and in the evenings they would sit quietly in the barn, sometimes talking, sometimes simply watching the sun set through the open doors. They shared meals, laughed over small mistakes, and began to understand each other in ways that went beyond words. Tom noticed that he no longer felt the sharp sting of loneliness in the same way. The barn, once a place of solitude, was becoming a space of comfort and connection. One evening, after a long day of work repairing a fence that had been damaged by the storm, Tom and Claire sat outside on the porch, watching the cattle graze in the fading light. The air was warm, scented with grass and earth, and the world felt calm and peaceful. Claire spoke about her travels, about the places she had seen and the people she had met. She didn't go into unnecessary detail, but Tom listened with interest, learning about a world he had rarely seen beyond the edges of his ranch. In turn, Tom shared stories of the ranch, of his family's history, and of the life he had built with Mary. He spoke of challenges he had faced, of storms weathered both literal and emotional, and of the lessons he had learned about resilience and hope. Claire listened, asking thoughtful questions, offering insights that were surprisingly perceptive for someone so young. Their conversations were easy, flowing naturally, and Tom found himself smiling more than he had in years. One rainy afternoon, while they were cleaning out an old storage shed, Claire found a photo tucked behind a stack of boxes. It was a picture of Tom and Mary standing together at the edge of the pasture, smiling at the camera. Claire handed the photo to Tom. He held it carefully, his eyes lingering on Mary's face. "I miss her," he said quietly. Claire nodded, understanding without needing to speak. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with shared understanding rather than awkwardness. Tom realized that he was beginning to trust Claire in a way he hadn't trusted anyone since Mary's passing. It wasn't just her presence, but the way she listened, the way she understood grief without judgment, the way she respected his boundaries while quietly offering companionship. He felt a sense of relief, a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. It was as if sharing his life with someone new, even in small ways, was helping him heal. As the days turned into weeks, Claire settled into a rhythm on the ranch. She began to take on more responsibility, helping with feeding, repairing fences, and even learning to ride horses. Tom watched her progress with quiet pride, impressed by her determination and her willingness to learn. At the same time, he noticed that his own life felt fuller, richer, and more meaningful. The barn, once a place of sorrow and emptiness, had become a space of life, laughter, and shared purpose. One evening, after a long day, Tom and Claire sat on the porch again, the sky ablaze with the colors of sunset. They spoke of dreams and fears, of regrets and hopes. Claire confessed that she had been wandering, searching for a place to belong, a place that felt safe. Tom realized that he too had been searching for the same thing, though in different ways. They had found in each other a quiet companionship, a connection that transcended words. Tom began to understand that life could still hold surprises. Even after loss and heartbreak, there were moments of beauty and connection waiting to be discovered. Claire's presence reminded him that grief did not have to define him, that he could still find joy, even in small ways. He thought about the letter to Mary again, realizing that sharing his feelings, whether through words or actions, was a step toward healing. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the ranch, Tom felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The barn, the animals, the fields, and the young woman who had stumbled into his life during a storm had all combined to create a new chapter. It was not perfect, and it was not free of pain, but it was alive with possibility. And as he closed the barn door for the night, listening to the soft sounds of Claire settling in for the evening, Tom realized that he was beginning to accept life as it was, not as he wished it to be, but as it was, and in that acceptance he found a quiet hope. The ranch, the barn, and his own heart were opening in ways he had not expected, and he felt ready to face the days ahead with courage, patience, and the understanding that even in solitude, connection could bloom unexpectedly. The days passed quietly on the ranch, but the rhythm of Tom Harrison's life was slowly changing. What had once been an endless cycle of chores, silence, and memories of his late wife now carried a new energy. Claire's presence was subtle but transformative. She helped in ways that went beyond mere chores. She asked questions that made Tom reflect, listened with patience that warmed his heart, and offered companionship without pushing or judging. Each day, he noticed small things: how she laughed softly when the animals were mischievous, how she carefully organized the barn tools, how she seemed to notice the beauty in the simple details of the land he had known all his life. It was during one quiet afternoon that their lives took a deeper turn. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the fields, and the air carried the faint scent of hay and earth. Claire had been exploring the barn, tidying up some old storage boxes that had been untouched for years. As she moved through the dim corners, her fingers brushed against something tucked away in a drawer, an envelope, yellowed with age but still intact. She held it up gently, turning it over to see the familiar handwriting, Tom's own. "Tom, what is this?" she asked softly, her curiosity gentle and respectful. Tom froze for a moment, a mix of surprise and hesitation crossing his face. He walked over slowly, taking the envelope from her hands. That's a letter I wrote to Mary," he admitted, his voice low, almost trembling. "I never sent it. I don't know why. I guess I thought it would make things harder, that maybe I wasn't ready to say all the things I felt." His eyes lingered on the envelope as if it held the weight of years of emotion. Claire sat on a bale of hay, her gaze steady. "Do you want to read it?" she asked quietly. There was no pressure in her voice, no rush, just an invitation. Tom hesitated, his fingers tightening around the envelope. Finally, he nodded. Maybe it's time." He unfolded the paper carefully and began to read aloud. His voice was low at first, almost as if the words were too heavy to speak. But as he continued, the emotions in his voice deepened. He spoke of the love he had felt for Mary, the little moments that had defined their life together, and the grief that still weighed on him every day. He admitted regrets, the things he hadn't said while she was alive, the fear of facing life without her, and the longing to hear her voice one last time. Claire listened without interrupting. She didn't offer advice or comfort right away. She simply listened. Her presence was steady, unwavering, a safe space for Tom to release the emotions he had held inside for far too long. The sound of his voice, filled with both sorrow and love, seemed to fill the barn in a new way, replacing the emptiness with something profound and alive. When he finally finished reading, he folded the letter carefully, his hands lingering on the paper as if feeling the warmth of Mary's memory. I guess I just needed someone to hear it," he said quietly, almost to himself. "I've kept it locked away for so long, thinking that holding it inside would make things easier, but it didn't. It only made the silence louder." Claire reached out, resting her hand lightly on his arm. "I'm glad you shared it with me," she said softly. "It's clear how much she meant to you, and it's clear that you loved her deeply. That's not something everyone gets to feel in a lifetime." Tom nodded, swallowing hard. Her words struck him more than he expected. They weren't pity or judgment, they were understanding. They acknowledged his grief while also recognizing the depth of the love that had shaped his life. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of release, a lightening of the burden he had carried alone. Sharing his feelings, even with someone he had just met, felt like a small step toward healing. As the days went on, Tom and Claire's connection deepened. They began to share more stories, not just about grief, but about their lives, their dreams, and the experiences that had brought them to this moment. Claire told Tom about her past, about losing her parents in a car accident when she was young, about drifting from place to place, searching for a sense of belonging she had never fully found. Her voice carried both pain and resilience, a mixture of sorrow and determination that mirrored, in many ways, the struggles Tom had faced with Mary's death. Tom, in turn, shared stories of his own family, of growing up on the ranch, and of the life he and Mary had built together. He told her about the small joys they had found in everyday life, the challenges they had faced, and the love that had sustained them through it all. In these moments, they discovered a shared understanding of loss, of the way grief could shape a person, and of the quiet strength required to keep moving forward despite it. The barn became a place of reflection, of shared memories, and of subtle healing. It was no longer just a shelter for animals or a place for chores. It had become a space where stories could be told, where emotions could be expressed, and where trust could grow. Tom found himself looking forward to Claire's presence, anticipating the conversations, the shared laughter, and even the comfortable silences that spoke volumes. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the fields, Tom and Claire worked side by side repairing a broken fence. The task required effort and focus, but also allowed them to talk freely. Claire asked questions about the ranch, about the animals, and about the routines that had filled Tom's life for decades. In answering, he realized how much he missed sharing these small details with someone who cared. Her curiosity was gentle, never intrusive, and it encouraged him to open up more than he had in years. After the fence was repaired, they sat on a hay bale, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. The quiet of the ranch, which had once been oppressive in its loneliness, now felt comforting, filled with the soft energy of companionship. Tom spoke again about Mary, about the moments that still made him smile, and about the grief that lingered even as he learned to carry it differently. Claire listened attentively, offering understanding, empathy, and sometimes just silence, an acknowledgement that words were not always necessary. Their bond grew stronger not through grand gestures, but through small, meaningful moments. Claire would help cook meals, wash dishes, or organize the barn, and Tom would share stories or simply sit nearby, appreciating the sense of presence that she brought. They began to trust each other, a rare and precious thing for two people who had known loss and disappointment. Tom realized that the fear of letting someone in had slowly begun to fade, replaced by a cautious but hopeful sense of connection. One rainy afternoon, while organizing old photographs and documents in the barn, Claire found a picture tucked into a box. It was a photo of Tom and Mary, taken years ago at the edge of the pasture, smiling in the golden light of sunset. Claire handed the photo to Tom, and he held it gently, his eyes softening as he gazed at Mary's face. "I miss her," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Claire nodded, understanding the depth of his words without needing to speak. That evening, after the rain had passed and the sky cleared, they sat on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the animals in the fields. Claire spoke quietly about her own longing for a place to belong, and Tom realized that he, too, had been searching in his own way, for someone to share his life with, for understanding and for healing. Their conversation was honest and raw, but it was also comforting, a reminder that they were not alone in their struggles. As the weeks went on, their routine became a delicate balance of work, conversation, and quiet companionship. Tom noticed that he was smiling more, laughing more easily, and feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since Mary's passing. The barn, once a place of emptiness, had become a sanctuary of healing, connection, and gentle hope. Claire's presence reminded him that life could still offer moments of joy and comfort, even after great loss. One evening, while they were feeding the animals, Claire paused and looked at Tom. "You know," she said softly, "sometimes it feels like we're both carrying pieces of the past, but we're also building something new here, something small but real." Tom nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He realized that she was right. They were not replacing the past, nor were they trying to forget it. They were simply creating space for healing, understanding, and perhaps a chance at happiness again. The barn became more than just a building. It became a symbol of transformation. Within its walls, Tom and Claire shared stories, expressed emotions, and supported each other. They discovered that grief could be softened by companionship, that trust could grow even after loss, and that healing often came in quiet, unassuming ways. Each day, as they worked together and shared their lives, the emptiness that had once defined the ranch began to fade, replaced by a sense of warmth, hope, and connection. By the end of Part 3, Tom realized that he was no longer just existing in solitude. He was living, sharing, and slowly learning to embrace life again. Claire's presence had reminded him that even in the midst of sorrow, there was room for understanding, trust, and subtle happiness. The barn, the ranch, and the memories of Mary all coexisted with this new connection, creating a delicate but meaningful balance in his heart. As the weeks passed on the ranch, the bond between Tom and Claire grew stronger. The barn, once a quiet, lonely place, was now filled with small moments of life, laughter, and companionship. They had developed a rhythm: chores in the morning, shared meals, and quiet evenings talking or sitting outside watching the sun set over the fields. Tom found himself opening up more than he had in years, sharing memories of Mary, stories of the ranch, and thoughts about life that he had kept to himself for far too long. Claire listened, always patient, always understanding. But despite the calm and the growing connection, tension was beginning to creep into Tom's thoughts. Not everyone in the nearby community approved of a stranger staying on his property. He had always been careful to respect the quiet ways of rural life, to follow the unspoken rules of neighbors and friends. Yet whispers began to reach him. The mailman mentioned seeing someone at the barn. A neighbor casually asked if he had taken in a guest. Some raised eyebrows, others muttered quietly when they passed by. Tom didn't want conflict. He valued his privacy and the peace he had fought to preserve after Mary's death, and yet he also couldn't imagine asking Claire to leave. She had become a part of the ranch, a presence that softened the heavy silence and brought warmth back into his life. The thought of sending her away felt impossible, almost cruel. And yet, he knew the outside world might not understand the delicate balance they had created. One afternoon, as they repaired a fence that had been damaged by a recent storm, Tom's thoughts weighed heavily. His hands moved almost mechanically, nailing posts and tying wires, while his mind wrestled with the unspoken tension. Claire noticed his quiet demeanor. "Tom," she said softly, "is something bothering you?" He paused, wiping sweat from his brow and looking at her. "It's the neighbors, the town, people are starting to talk. I'm not sure they understand why you're here." His voice was calm, but there was an undercurrent of worry. "I don't want to make things difficult, but I also don't want to ask you to leave." Claire looked down at her hands, then back at him. "I understand," she said. "I didn't want to cause trouble, I feel safe here. I feel like I belong, even if only a little." There was a pause, a quiet moment of understanding between them. "But I don't want to be a burden either," she added. Tom shook his head gently. "You're not a burden," he said firmly. "It's just, I don't know how to navigate this. I'm used to being alone. I thought I wanted solitude, but now I realize I want connection too, and I can't just ignore the world outside." Their conversation was interrupted by the distant sound of a truck on the gravel road. Claire's expression changed slightly, a mixture of curiosity and unease. "That's probably my brother," she said quietly. Tom turned, noticing the dust rising from the road as the vehicle approached. Claire had spoken of her family before, briefly mentioning an estranged brother, but she had never shared much detail. Now, the possibility of him arriving brought a new tension into the air. The truck stopped at the edge of the property, and a tall, lean man stepped out. He looked around, taking in the fields and the barn, then walked toward them. "Claire," he called. His voice carried a mix of concern and urgency. Claire walked toward him cautiously. "Yes," she replied. Her voice was calm, but there was a hint of tension. "What are you doing here?" He explained that he had been trying to locate her, concerned for her safety after hearing she had been traveling alone. He wanted her to come home, to reconnect with family she had been distant from for years. Claire listened, torn. She had never been close to her brother, and her life on the road had been her way of coping with loss and uncertainty. Now, faced with the possibility of returning to her family, she felt a mixture of fear, duty, and hesitation. Tom watched quietly, his heart tightening. He knew this was a turning point. Claire had found a place on the ranch where she felt safe, where she had begun to heal. But he also knew that he could not control her choices. She had to decide for herself. That night, Claire sat quietly in the barn, the sound of the animals moving in their stalls filling the space. She spoke softly to Tom. "I need to think," she said. "I've spent so long running, avoiding everyone, including my family. Now they've found me and I don't know what to do. I don't want to leave, but I don't know if I can stay forever either." Tom nodded, understanding. "I get it," he said quietly. "I can't ask you to stay if your heart isn't here. But I want you to know that this place and we welcome you. No pressure, no expectations. You get to choose what's right for you." Claire looked at him, her eyes filled with emotion. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's just hard to make a decision. For the first time in years, I feel like I belong somewhere, but I also feel pulled in another direction." The days that followed were tense, filled with quiet reflection and unspoken questions. Claire spent time walking the fields, helping with chores, and occasionally sitting alone in the barn, lost in thought. Tom gave her space, but he could feel the weight of the choice she was facing. The barn, which had been a place of warmth and companionship, now felt like the center of a delicate balance. One small misstep, one rushed decision, could upset everything they had built. One afternoon, Tom found himself going through old photographs and documents in the barn. As he looked at images of the ranch and his family, he realized how much he had learned about resilience, about holding on and letting go, and about the quiet strength required to navigate life's challenges. He thought about Claire, about the bravery it took for her to face her past, and about the trust she had placed in him by choosing to stay, even temporarily. He decided to speak honestly with her that evening. They sat outside on the porch, the sky painted in soft hues of orange and pink, the animals grazing quietly nearby. "Claire," he began, "I know this isn't easy. You have a choice to make and it's yours alone. I can't make it for you and I won't try. But I need you to know, I trust you to decide what's right for you, and no matter what, you've made this place brighter, warmer, and more alive than it has been in years." Claire looked at him, her eyes glistening in the fading light. "Thank you, Tom," she said softly. "That means more than you know. I don't want to hurt you or make things complicated, but I also need to figure out where I belong." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The quiet was comfortable, filled with understanding rather than tension. They both knew that change was inevitable, that choices had to be made, and that life would move forward regardless of their fears or doubts. Yet, in that moment, they also knew that they had each other's trust, a bond that could withstand uncertainty and distance. Later that night, as Tom lay in his bed, he thought about Mary, about the love they had shared, and about the lessons he had learned in grief. He realized that life was full of difficult decisions, moments when letting go or holding on required courage. Claire's situation was no different. He could not control her choice, but he could offer her support, understanding, and a place to belong, even if temporarily. That realization brought him a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. Meanwhile, Claire walked the fields under the moonlight, feeling the cool grass beneath her boots and the gentle breeze on her face. She thought about her brother, about the life she had left behind, and about the unexpected connection she had found on the ranch. She realized that she had been searching for safety, understanding, and a sense of home, and for the first time in years, she had found all three in this quiet place with Tom. The next morning, they worked together in silence, tending to the animals and repairing the barn. Words were unnecessary, their shared presence was enough. Each small task, each moment of cooperation reinforced the bond they had built. They knew that the decision Claire faced was looming, but for now, they focused on the present, on the tangible work and the quiet companionship that made the ranch feel alive once again. Finally, one evening, after a long day of work and reflection, Claire turned to Tom. "I've thought about it," she said softly. "I'm not ready to go yet. I want to stay, at least for a while. I want to help to learn to be part of this place. But I also need to make peace with the past, and that will take time." Tom smiled, relief and warmth spreading through him. "Then stay," he said simply. "There's a place for you here, and I'm glad you're choosing to be part of it. No rush, no pressure. We'll take it one day at a time." That night, as the moon rose over the ranch and the stars twinkled in the clear sky, Tom and Claire sat quietly in the barn. The air was filled with the faint scent of hay and the sound of animals settling for the night. They knew that challenges still lay ahead, that decisions and conflicts were part of life. But for now, they had each other, and that was enough. The barn, once a place of solitude and grief, had become a sanctuary of trust, understanding, and hope. It was a place where two people, both carrying pain and loss, had found a connection that allowed them to heal, to trust, and to begin imagining a life beyond sorrow. And as they drifted off to sleep that night, each in their own space in the barn, they knew that the choices they faced would not be easy, but they were ready to face them together, with courage, patience, and the quiet hope that life could still hold unexpected joys and second chances. The early morning sun stretched across the fields, casting a warm glow on the ranch and illuminating the barn where Tom and Claire had shared so many quiet, reflective moments. After weeks of uncertainty, Claire had made her choice, a decision that would shape both their lives. She had decided to stay, not permanently, not necessarily forever, but for now to embrace the sanctuary she had found on the ranch and the companionship she had grown to trust. The weight of the choice felt both liberating and daunting, but she faced it with a mixture of courage and relief. Tom noticed a subtle change in her as she moved through the barn, carrying feed and checking on the animals. There was a calm determination in her movements, a quiet confidence that had not been there before. Claire's presence, once tentative and cautious, now seemed fully integrated into the rhythm of the ranch. She laughed more freely, spoke with warmth, and handled the daily chores with care and focus. The barn and the surrounding fields felt alive again, not just with the movement of animals and wind through the grass, but with the energy of shared life and connection. They spent the morning together, repairing a section of fence that had been weakened by the storm. Tom watched her work, her hands skillful and sure, her face calm despite the effort. He realized that she had become indispensable, not just in practical ways, but in the emotional atmosphere she brought to the ranch. She had softened the loneliness that had pervaded the property for years, bringing a sense of life and hope that he hadn't realized he had been missing. After they finished, they sat on a hay bale, taking in the fields stretching out before them. The sun was higher now, the warmth of its rays comforting against the cool morning air. Tom handed Claire a bottle of water, and she smiled, a genuine, easy smile that made his chest feel lighter than it had in years. For a long moment, they simply watched the cattle grazing quietly, listening to the faint rustle of the wind through the grass. "I've been thinking," Claire said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll stay here forever or if I'll eventually go back to my family or even travel again. But for now, I want to be here. This place and you have given me something I didn't think I could find anymore, a sense of home, a sense of peace." Tom nodded, feeling a warmth spread through him that went beyond words. "I'm glad you've chosen to stay, even if only for now," he said softly. "This place has been empty for too long, and having you here, it feels right. Not because I want to fill a space, but because life feels fuller, lighter somehow." There was a quiet understanding between them. Neither tried to define what this bond was, friendship, companionship, or something deeper, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the mutual trust, the shared healing, and the ability to find comfort and hope in each other's presence. The barn, once a symbol of loneliness and sorrow, had become a sanctuary of growth, understanding, and subtle joy. Later that day, Tom decided to do something he had postponed for too long. He walked to his house, pulled out the letter he had written to Mary, and held it carefully. The words had been spoken aloud to Claire already, but now it was time to let them go in a way that felt complete. He walked to the small cemetery on the edge of the property, where Mary was buried beneath a modest marker surrounded by wildflowers. The letter felt heavy in his hand, but also freeing, a final expression of love, grief, and acceptance. Standing by her grave, he unfolded the paper and read it silently, letting the words flow one last time. Tears filled his eyes, but there was no sharp pain, no emptiness. Instead, there was a quiet peace, a sense that he had honored Mary's memory fully, that he had spoken the words he needed to speak, and that he could now carry forward with life. He carefully placed the folded letter in a small envelope and left it at her grave, a gesture of closure and love. When he returned to the ranch, Claire was waiting by the barn, tending to the animals. She looked up as he approached, her expression soft and curious. "How was it?" she asked gently. Tom smiled faintly, feeling lighter than he had in years. "It was good, peaceful. I think it's time to let go of some of the grief I've carried, not forget it, not erase it, but to carry it differently, to allow room for life again." Claire nodded, understanding without needing more words. She had been through her own share of loss and displacement, and she recognized the courage it took to confront grief and find a way to move forward. They didn't speak much more that evening, but the silence was filled with mutual understanding, respect, and the quiet reassurance of shared resilience. Days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm. Claire's presence became a constant, comforting part of the daily routine. She and Tom worked together, shared meals, and occasionally sat outside in the evenings, watching the sun dip below the horizon. They talked about the past, shared stories of people and places they had known, and quietly reflected on the ways their lives had intersected. The community began to notice the change as well. Neighbors who had once whispered about the stranger in the barn now observed the partnership on the ranch with quiet respect. Claire's gentle presence and helpful demeanor began to earn admiration, and even the most skeptical neighbors started to see her as someone who belonged. Tom felt a sense of relief. The whispers and raised eyebrows no longer held power over him. He had chosen to trust his own judgment, to honor the connection he and Claire had built, and that decision brought a sense of liberation. One afternoon, as they repaired an old shed near the back of the property, Claire paused and looked at Tom. "You know," she said softly, "I think this place has given me more than I realized. Not just shelter or work or safety, but a chance to be part of something real." "Something meaningful," Tom nodded, his eyes reflecting a mixture of pride and warmth. "And you've given this place and me the same thing," he said. "I didn't realize how much I needed that connection until you arrived. You've helped me see that life can still be beautiful, even after loss." There was a quiet moment between them, filled with the soft sounds of the animals and the rustling of the wind through the trees. Neither spoke for long, but the silence was comforting, a testament to the bond they had built. It was not perfect, and it was not free from grief or uncertainty, but it was alive and it was real. As the days passed, they continued to work together, to share responsibilities, and to support each other. They repaired fences, tended to animals, cleaned the barn, and managed the daily challenges of life on the ranch. But beyond the work, there were small moments that mattered just as much. Laughter over spilled feed, quiet conversations under the stars, and the simple comfort of knowing someone was there. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of gold and pink, Tom and Claire sat on the porch, sipping coffee and watching the fields stretch out before them. The cattle grazed quietly, and the distant hills seemed to glow in the fading light. Claire spoke of her dreams, tentative plans for the future, and the hope she now felt for the first time in years. Tom shared his own reflections, the lessons he had learned about love, loss, and the quiet power of companionship. In that moment, they understood something profound. Life was not about perfection or certainty, but about connection, trust, and the courage to embrace each day fully. They had both faced grief, loss, and loneliness, but they had found a way to heal together, to support each other, and to create a life that was meaningful in its simplicity. Weeks turned into months, and the ranch continued to thrive under their care. The barn remained a central part of their lives, a symbol of resilience, trust, and new beginnings. Tom and Claire had built a life that honored the past while embracing the present, a delicate balance that brought them peace and quiet joy. One cool morning, as mist hovered over the fields and the first rays of sun broke through the horizon, Claire stood at the edge of the pasture, watching the animals move about. She felt a sense of belonging that she had never known before, a feeling that she could stay in this place, contribute to it, and grow alongside it. Tom joined her, and they stood together in companionable silence, taking in the beauty of the land and the calm of the moment. "We've come a long way," Claire said softly, breaking the silence. "Yes, we have," Tom replied, "and I think we've just begun." The barn, the ranch, and their lives were now intertwined in ways neither of them had anticipated. The pain of loss had not disappeared, but it had been softened by shared understanding, trust, and the simple act of caring for each other and the land around them. Life had opened a new chapter, one filled with quiet hope, companionship, and the possibility of joy even in the aftermath of sorrow. And as they walked back toward the barn, side by side, the sun rising higher in the sky, they knew that the future, while uncertain, held promise. They had found a way to heal, to trust, and to embrace life fully together. The barn, once a symbol of grief and solitude, had become a place of hope, connection, and the start of something new. For Tom and Claire, the past and the present coexisted in harmony. Memories of those they had loved and lost, lessons learned through hardship, and the quiet joy of companionship and understanding. And as the day unfolded over the ranch, they faced it with courage, patience, and a shared sense of possibility, knowing that life, though unpredictable, could still bring moments of profound meaning and unexpected joy.